In the glittering chaos of the 1968 Grammy Awards, one moment would fracture the illusion of Hollywood's progressive facade and test the soul of its most talented black entertainer. Sammy Davis Jr. sat in the front row, his custom tuxedo catching the stage lights, a man who had tap danced, sung, and charmed his way to the summit of American entertainment, despite every door slammed in his face. The air hummed with anticipation, cigarette smoke curling toward the chandeliers as the industry's elite applauded and whispered, their champagne glasses reflecting fragments of carefully constructed dreams. But beneath the sequins and standing ovations, racial tensions simmered like a pot about to boil over, and Sammy could feel it in his bones. He had conquered Broadway, sold millions of records, and earned the respect of legends like Frank Sinatra, yet walking into this room still required an armor most would never understand. The weight of representing his entire race at every moment pressed against his chest, even as he flashed that million-dollar smile that had become his trademark and his shield. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a validation of everything he had fought for through the Jim Crow South, the death threats, and the Hollywood executives who couldn't decide if they loved him or feared him. What Sammy didn't know was that in mere minutes that smile would be tested in ways that would echo through generations. Jerry Lewis bounded onto that stage with the manic energy that had made him America's favorite comedian, his tuxedo slightly askew, that familiar rubbery grin stretching across his face as the crowd erupted in applause. He grabbed the microphone like a lifeline, his eyes scanning the audience until they landed on Sammy. And something shifted in his expression, a flash of calculation mixed with the desperate hunger of a performer who needed the biggest laugh of the night. The words that tumbled from his mouth next would slice through the glamorous air like a razor, a joke about Sammy's race, his skin, delivered with a timing so perfect it made the cruelty land twice as hard. The laughter that followed was nervous, scattered, dying in throats as people realized they had just witnessed something that couldn't be taken back. The ballroom transformed into a vacuum of suffocating silence, crystal chandeliers bearing witness to a wound being carved in real time across a man's dignity. Sammy felt every eye in that room pivot toward him like searchlights, waiting to see if the entertainer would crack, if the smile would finally falter and reveal the rage that any human being would rightfully feel. His wife Pearl's hand found his beneath the white tablecloth, squeezing with a pressure that said both, "I'm here," and "Please don't let them break you." In that eternal moment, Sammy Davis Jr. understood that his response would define not just his career, but what it meant to survive in a world that demanded you entertain your own humiliation. The smile that Sammy painted across his face was a masterpiece of survival, decades in the making, every muscle memory. From 1,000 nights in segregated clubs, from 100 dressing rooms where he couldn't use the front entrance, from countless moments when laughter at his expense was the price of admission to their world. The cameras zoomed in mercilessly, broadcast lenses hungry for the close-up that would reveal whether this giant of entertainment would shatter on live television. His jaw remained set in that trademark grin, but those watching closely could see the micro-tremor at the corner of his mouth, the way his knuckles blanched white against the tablecloth, how his other hand unconsciously reached for the Star of David hanging beneath his shirt collar, a talisman of another people's persecution he'd claimed as his own. Around him, the industry elite became a Greek chorus of discomfort. Elizabeth Taylor looked away with tears threatening her eyeliner. Dean Martin's face hardened into something dangerous, while producers and studio heads engaged in frantic mental calculations about damage control and career trajectories. The whispers began as a poisonous rustle through the ballroom. Would NBC pull his upcoming special? Would the Sands Casino reconsider his headlining contract? Could a black entertainer survive being publicly diminished by someone as beloved as Jerry Lewis? Pearl leaned close enough that her perfume cut through his paralysis, whispering words only he could hear. They're watching to see if you're still their dancing boy or finally a man who breaks. But breaking wasn't in Sammy's vocabulary, couldn't be, not when every step he'd taken had been on behalf of those who couldn't even get through the door. The hotel suite felt like a cathedral at midnight when the telephone's shrill ring shattered. Sammy's isolation, pulling him from the amber embrace of his third tumbler of scotch. Frank's voice came through the receiver, rough as gravel. No preamble, no pretense. "We don't let family bleed alone, Charlie. Dean's ready to walk from the Paramount picture. Peter's pulling his Carson appearance, and I've got Capitol Records on notice." The words should have been balm. This confirmation that the Rat Pack Brotherhood transcended the stage glitter and publicity stunts. Yet Sammy felt his throat constrict because accepting their protection meant admitting he couldn't fight this battle standing on his own 2 feet. Frank continued, his tone shifting to something darker, more dangerous. "Say the word, and Jerry Lewis never works another room in Vegas, never gets another network special. I'll make him a ghost in this town before sunrise." The offer hung in the cigarette-stale air like original sin, tempting as it was terrible, because Sammy knew Frank possessed both the power and the ruthlessness to execute that promise. But even as rage thrummed through his veins, even as every humiliation he'd ever swallowed threatened to erupt as vengeance, Sammy saw his father's face in the window's reflection, heard that Alabama-worn voice saying, "Dignity ain't what they give you, it's what they can't take away." The receiver clicked dead in Sammy's trembling hand, Frank's offer of vengeance, still echoing through the suite's hollow silence like a devil's lullaby he couldn't unhear. He crossed to the dressing table where his stage costumes hung like abandoned skins, each sequined jacket a testament to the 1,000 smiles he'd manufactured for crowds who'd never see him as fully human. His fingers found the drawer's brass handle, pulling it open to reveal the chaos of forgotten things, ticket stubs, publicity photos, telegram congratulations. And there, beneath everything, the envelope yellowed with age and bearing his father's unsteady handwriting. The letter trembled as he unfolded it, his vision blurring not from the scotch, but from the weight of words written by hands that had picked cotton before they'd taught a boy to tap dance. "Son, they'll test you in ways I can't imagine, put you on stages I never dreamed of. But remember this, every time you stand tall when they want you to bow, you're not just saving yourself." His father's voice rose from the page like resurrection, each word a hammer striking the anvil of his resolve. "You're showing every colored child watching that their humanity isn't up for negotiation, that grace ain't weakness, it's the strongest thing a man can carry." The paper crinkled against his chest as Sammy pressed it there, feeling his father's promise become his own heartbeat. The Chrysler idled outside Jerry's Brentwood estate, like a panther waiting to pounce, its engine ticking in the pre-dawn cold, while Sammy's driver shot him questioning glances through the rearview mirror. Nobody visited Jerry Lewis at 4 in the morning, especially not the man he'd humiliated on national television. But Sammy had learned that the most powerful moves happened when the world wasn't watching. He stepped onto the circular driveway, his father's letter folded square against his heart, each footfall on the flagstone path a choice between the man he'd been and the man he'd promised to become. The doorbell's chime shattered the silence once, twice, 3 times before shuffling footsteps approached and the door cracked open to reveal Jerry's face, unshaven, confused, stripped of the performer's mask that made cruelty look like comedy. Recognition dawned in his eyes like sunrise over wreckage, something between shame and terror flashing across features that had commanded 1,000 stages. Sammy didn't wait for the invitation, pushing past him into the marble foyer where movie posters and awards gleamed in the half-light, like monuments to a man who'd never learned that laughter built on another's pain was just screaming in a different key. "We need to talk," Sammy said, his voice carrying the weight of every slur he'd swallowed, every joke he'd endured, every door that had closed despite his talent blazing bright. Enough to burn the whole damn system down. Jerry sank onto the curved sofa beneath his own giant portrait, hands trembling as he reached for a crystal decanter that promised escape but delivered only delay. The silence stretched between them like barbed wire until words tumbled out in broken confession, how his real name was Joseph Levitch, how his father had anglicized everything to survive, how he'd learned early that making people laugh meant they wouldn't notice you were different. "My grandfather wore the yellow star in Warsaw," Jerry whispered, his comedian's timing replaced by the halting rhythm of shame. "And I thought if I could make them laugh hard enough, loud enough, they'd forget I was one of the people they used to hate." Sammy felt something shift in his chest, a door he'd kept locked, cracking open, to reveal not an enemy, but a mirror reflecting a different kind of survival. He moved closer, sitting on the opposite end of the sofa, where two men who'd performed their entire lives could finally stop pretending. "You threw me under the bus to save yourself," Sammy said, not accusing but naming the thing between them. "Like somehow my pain would purchase your permission to belong." The words hung there, neither absolution nor condemnation, just the terrible truth that oppression taught its victims to cannibalize each other, rather than confront the system that fed on them both. Jerry's face crumpled like paper, tears cutting tracks through the mask of the untouchable star. "I became what hurt me," he breathed, the recognition dawning with the horror of a man seeing his reflection in a funhouse mirror. "I thought if I laughed at you first, they wouldn't remember to laugh at me." Outside, dawn began, painting the canyon gold, light spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows to illuminate two men stripped down to their wounds. Sammy pulled his father's letter from his pocket, unfolding it with the reverence of a man handling scripture. "My father told me never to let them make me smaller," he said, his voice carrying the weight of ancestors who'd transformed chains into songs. "But he never said I couldn't help another man stand taller." He extended his hand across the space between them, offering not friendship, but something more precious. The possibility that brokenness recognized could become the foundation for something stronger than either man had built alone. The spotlight found Sammy at the Kennedy Center 3 weeks later, his patent leather shoes reflecting 1,000 faces holding their breath in anticipation of vengeance. Instead, he opened his arms wide as a gospel hymn, letting silence become the stage where transformation could walk, and spoke words that turned weapons into water. "A man once hurt me because someone had hurt him first." His voice rolled like thunder wrapped in velvet. "And tonight, I choose to break that chain rather than forge another link." The audience leaned forward as one body, sensing they were witnessing not performance, but prophecy. History pivoting on the axis of one man's refusal to return darkness for darkness. Jerry Lewis sat in the third row, tears streaming openly down his face as Sammy began to sing a melody that wove together spirituals his grandmother had hummed and Yiddish lullabies Jerry's mother had sung, creating harmony from heritage. The music became medicine, each note a suture closing wounds that generations had kept bleeding, proving that pain, acknowledged, could become the foundation for unprecedented grace. Cameras captured the moment Jerry stood, then the entire room rose like a wave, applause becoming thunder that shook the chandeliers and announced that something sacred had just been born from something broken. Backstage, Frank Sinatra crushed Sammy in an embrace that said what words couldn't, while reporters scrambled to capture the revolution happening in real time. "You just changed the game, Charlie," Frank whispered, using his nickname like a benediction, understanding that Sammy had weaponized vulnerability in ways that violence never could. In the balcony's shadow sat Marcus Thompson, a 19-year-old saxophonist whose calloused fingers hadn't touched his instrument in months after being turned away from every jazz club in Chicago for the crime of his dark skin. He had purchased his ticket with rent money, desperate for something to believe in again, his horn case gathering dust beneath a bed that barely kept him warm. When Sammy's words about Breaking chains instead of forging new ones filled the Kennedy Center. Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest, where hope had been buried alive. The melody that followed, those spirituals braided with Yiddish songs, became oxygen to lungs that had forgotten how to breathe deeply. Marcus watched Jerry Lewis rise from his seat, tears carving rivers down his face, and suddenly understood that pain could be transformed into purpose rather than poison. His grandmother's voice echoed across memory, telling him that their people had always turned suffering into songs, oppression into orchestras of resistance. When the entire room erupted in standing ovation, Marcus was already moving, pushing through the crowd with his heart hammering a new rhythm. He burst into the night air and ran 7 blocks to his apartment, hands shaking as he pulled the saxophone case from beneath the bed. The brass felt like redemption against his lips as he played his first notes in months, the sound rough but real, filling his small room with defiant beauty. Tomorrow he would return to every club that had rejected him, not with anger but with Sammy's grace, weaponized into persistence. Marcus played until dawn broke over Chicago, his music declaring that one man's courage could resurrect another man's dreams. In that moment, Sammy Davis Jr.'s legacy multiplied, rippling outward through a young artist who finally understood that dignity was the most powerful performance of all. 30 years after that Grammy night, a film canister arrived at the Smithsonian marked "For History Only," containing footage that would finally complete the circle of reconciliation. The grainy images showed Jerry Lewis in Sammy's dressing room just months before Sammy's death, both men weathered by time but softened by understanding, as Jerry's voice cracked saying, "You saved my soul when you could have destroyed my career." Their embrace lasted 17 seconds, long enough for 2 lifetimes of pain to dissolve into the profound friendship that flourished in private, while the world assumed only bitterness remained. Marcus Thompson stood in that same Smithsonian exhibit decades later, now a legendary saxophonist himself, bringing his teenage granddaughter to witness the man who had resurrected his dreams. He pointed to Sammy's trademark rings and tap shoes preserved behind glass, explaining how one moment of grace had cascaded through generations, like light through a prism. His granddaughter noticed the letter from Sammy's father, displayed alongside the Grammy, its words, "Never let them make you smaller," still radiating power across the decades. The exhibit's final wall displayed photographs of every artist Sammy had mentored, every door he'd kicked open, every stage he'd integrated with nothing but talent and unshakable dignity as his weapons. Marcus's own album cover hung among them, part of a constellation of black excellence that Sammy had helped birth into existence. Visitors left messages on a digital wall, testimonies from musicians, actors, and dreamers whose lives had been touched by a man who chose forgiveness as his most radical act. Outside the museum, Marcus lifted his saxophone to his lips and played the same melody that had saved him that Chicago dawn, the notes carrying Sammy's legacy into the evening air where new dreamers walked past. His granddaughter recorded it on her phone, already imagining her own stage, her own moment to transform pain into purpose. Sammy Davis Jr. had proven that breaking chains required more courage than forging them, that one man's grace under fire could ignite 1,000 souls into their own greatness. The music continued, as it always would, because dignity never dies when it's performed with love. What moment of grace changed the direction of your life? Subscribe to discover more stories of courage that transformed history.